Yeah, I do the same thing at the fun educational programs.
I'm not going to shut it off because hardly anybody calls me anyway.
But I do the same thing. We have a guy, Fred Lake, who David knows, and I'm going to get Fred to show up some year in a gorilla outfit and tell him, here's the official fun gorilla. He will eat your cell phone if you don't have it in the off position. Well, David, if you want to give me the 3, 2, 1 blast-off signal. Thank you, David. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Randy Campbell. Some of you may know me as the current president of Fun. And if you don't know it, you can read it right here. Some of you know me as the former president of the National Silver Dollar Roundtable, and indeed I was a founding board member. Some of you know me as a grader for ANACS for over 18 years. I spent many of those years in the Columbus, Ohio area, and I had just a fabulous time. And some of you know me as the current senior grader of ICG Grading Service of Tampa, Florida. I've been the senior grader there now for almost 9 years. Some of you may even remember me as writing the grading column for Coin World from the early 90s up to 2010, and yes, I did that. And some of you have never heard of me in your entire life, and you may be better off for it. We'll see. What we're going to talk about here is something that got started last summer. Last summer at the A&A show here in Chicago, Kevin Foley, who helps to run the Central States shows, I'm sure most of you know, Kevin Foley invited me and some other fun board members to dinner at a nice steakhouse not far from the coin show. Kevin and I sat down. Kevin told his stories. I told some of my stories from what it was like to be in this great hobby many decades ago. And by the end of the night, we were laughing, and actually it hurt. We'd been laughing so long and so hard. Later, as the evening wound down, Kevin totally shocked me and surprised me by saying, you know, you've been in this for 50 years, is it? He said, I'm sure that a lot of people would love to hear some of these stories you just told me. Now, don't tell that one story, but he said, you can tell most of these stories, and I'm sure there's a few people at Central States who'd love to hear you do it. Well, I was reluctant because I feel very uncomfortable talking about myself. I'd feel more comfortable talking about the accomplishments of other people, and indeed there are many great people in this industry who I have praised and given awards to in my various functions. But he persuaded me to do it, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the title of this program is something like 50 years in the business. Well, actually that's a lie, because the first time I got paid to work at a coin show was in March of 1960. That would make 57 years for me as an active member of this hobby and business. And what a trip it has been. It all began January 15th, 1947, the day of my birth. Within a few days, I was placed in an orphanage in the town of my birth, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Eventually, before I was a year old, 2 older folks took me into their home over in Woodstock, Ontario, which is about 100 miles or so west of the Toronto area. When I was 3 years old, my oldest brother-in-law gave me a token with the date 1812 on it, and I was mystified. I was fascinated by this really old coin. And I was so mystified that I actually, by the time I was 4, I made my mother take me to a library where I could look up a Canadian textbook on coins. And yes, I could read quite well when I was 3 and 4 years old. And I asked my mom, I said, if you have any relatives, or if my brother-in-law has relatives out in Western Canada that have some old coins he'd like to give me, I'd sure like to have them and study them and learn all about them. And sure enough, they did. Then came the summer of 1954. I was 7.5 years old. My parents had just made a momentous decision. They were going to move to America. That was the good news. The bad news was they moved to Buffalo, the land of atrocious winters. While in Buffalo, my mom made another momentous decision. She said, Randy, we're not Canadians anymore, we're Americans. So you're going to take these Canadian coins down to that coin shop we just saw down the road, and you're going to start collecting American coins. I thought, boy, what a great idea. So I went down there, my mom and I, and we were absolutely blown away when this dealer in Buffalo paid us $78 for my little box of about 50 or so Canadian coins and tokens. My father, in fact, refused to believe it until my mother actually showed him the cash and the receipt. So my dad, who was a gunny sergeant in World War II in the Canadian Army, and he talked like a gunny sergeant, shook his head and said, well, maybe we need to encourage Randy in this regard. So my parents bought a business in a suburb of Buffalo called West Seneca. They bought a gas station and a garage, and in the years we were in Buffalo, I studied the coins. I went through every coin. I knew that Lincoln cents were first struck in 1909, and that Indian cents also were struck in 1909, just from what was coming in the till. Barber coinage was in circulation. Occasionally, we even got a seated Liberty coin, although mostly they were very badly worn. And silver dollars by the ton. I loved silver dollars, American silver dollars, from the time I first set eyes on them. Nothing's changed since then. However, my dad's fascination and love with Buffalo and the United States soon parted ways. He loved the USA, but he'd grown very tired of the 20-foot snowdrifts. We had a house in Buffalo that had 2 stories, and our last winter there, the snow was over the roof of a 2-story house. I am not kidding you. If I hadn't seen it myself, I would never have believed it. We were marooned in our house for almost 2 weeks, and at the end of the 2 weeks, my dad did what they tell you to never do. He tunneled out to the street. Remember, this is a fearless man who fought pitched battles in World War II. He dug this cave, if you will, or tunnel out to the street, propped it up, and by golly, we got out. We walked to our gas station, which my mom and dad owned. It was about 200 yards from the house. He got out a Willis Jeep, 1944 vintage, with a snowplow that was as high as the top of that projection screen. And he plowed out every house on that street. My father was the hero of Lewis Avenue. He said, forgive me here, hero my ass, we're getting our buns out of here. Those are not his exact words, but that was the gist of it. Remember, he was a gunny sergeant. So my dad says, we're moving to Palm Beach County. I've had enough of winters. Well, we moved to Palm Beach County in 1959, and I was 12 years old at the time. As soon as we moved to Palm Beach County, I got on my bicycle and rode 6 miles to the nearest coin shop. I was a quick learner at that age. The owner of the coin shop was a very wealthy, underline very, wealthy retired coin dealer from Brooklyn. This wonderful Jewish man shunned retirement and decided to open up a coin shop at about roughly the age of 65 or 67, I think he was then. Lucky for me. Every weekend I would go down there, I would listen and watch the transactions. And after a few weeks, he said, I'm going to go across the street to lunch. I want you to run the coin shop for me, and I'll be back in about a half an hour. Now, at this point, I just turned 13. So he showed me where to put the sales, where to put the purchases, and how the whole system worked. And one day he came back from a half-hour lunch, and I'd bought $1,000 worth of coins and sold over $2,000. And he said, let me see these coins. And he looked through them, and he said, I'm going to have you back more often. So 6 months later, the same dealer called my mother and said, I need to hire Randy to work a coin show with me next Sunday in Miami Beach. My mother says, okay, what's the deal? He said, well, I'll pay your son $8 a day, which was a good wage in 1960, and I'll buy him lunch and dinner. Now that's where he took a beating, because I was built like this. I ate enormous quantities of food, and I couldn't put on a pound. So my mother's response was, keep him for 2 days. Well, what a time I had at my first coin show. I was hot stuff. I was getting paid to help a pretty well-known coin dealer. One of the things I did had to do with the 030 silver dollar. And unless you're really an old guy like me, you wouldn't know that the 030 dollar was far and away the most famous and expensive Morgan dollar of the time. Before the BU bags were dispersed by the U.S. Treasury, there were less than 40 known 030 dollars in early 1960, and all of them were circulated except for maybe 1 or 2 unks. They brought enormous prices at auctions. My boss had bought 2 of them and paid about $1,350 each for them, cash of course. And a doctor, a surgeon at a hospital in Miami Beach was supposed to show up and buy one for $1,500. So he described to me what the doctor looked like, and he said, I've got to go to the restroom, I'll be back in a few minutes. If he shows up, that's the price. Well, right on cue, as my boss enters the men's room, the doctor comes up to the table and he said, oh, you must be the young man that works for the coin dealer. I said, yes, sir, I am. I said, you must be Dr. Such and Such. He said, that's right. He said, well, let me see that 030 dollar. So I turned around, and as I'm turning back to him, I said, I've got good news for you, doctor. We actually have 2 of them. He said, wow, I've never seen any dealer ever have 2 030s. And that was not an exaggeration. I don't think any of the major coin dealers in the 50s ever had 2 030s in stock at the same time. He said, are they $1,500? I said, that's right, doctor. So he studies them, and then he raises his head up to me and said, which one do you like better? Here I am, a 13-year-old kid, and a doctor's asking me this question. So I'm thinking on my feet here. I said, doctor, here's what I think you should do. I think you should buy both of these coins. I think they're virtually identical, which is true. I think you should buy them both. You must know another surgeon, another staff doctor who would love to have an 030. He said, oh, yes, I do. I said, well, here's what you should do. Take them both home, put them in your study under a good light, and you decide which one you like the best. Keep that one and sell the other one to your associate for $1,600 or whatever you want to sell it for. She said, son, that's a great idea. So he peels off 30 $100 bills. I put them in the corner of the Bourse case, give him the 2 030 dollars. He's out the door. About 3 minutes later, my boss returns from the restroom and says, Randy, what did you do with those 030s? I said, sir, there's 30 $100 bills over here. I sold both of them to the doctor. He said, both of them? He said, well, how did you do that? So I told him the story. He shakes his head, scratches his head. He's counting out the 30 $100 bills. And he says, you know, I think you've got a future in this business. So I knew I was going to get $8 that day and a full belly of food twice. So I was ready to roll. The dealer to our left at this show, and it was a big show for 1960. It was about 24, 25 tables, and that was a big show. Had a showcase with almost nothing but deeply mirrored proof-like Morgan dollars. He must have had 50 of them there. And I looked through them, and I looked through them, and boy, I was really interested in that. And then I looked to the dealer to the right, and he had a showcase full of nothing but 1928 peace dollars. Where did he get these peace dollars? 1960. You history buffs probably remember that in 1959, Fidel Castro took over in Havana. One of the first things he did was close the casinos. The casinos were run by the mafia and made $1 zillion every year. And they had dealers down there, and when you placed your bets, you did it with real silver dollars. And the guys who dealt down there knew about better date silver dollars, even though they were in circulation. And when they came to America to escape communism, a lot of them just had the clothes on their back and some silver dollars and gold pieces in their pocket. That's all they had. And 2 peace dollars were put away by all the dealers at the casinos in Havana, the 21 peace dollar and the 28. So for a period of about 3 months in early 1960, if you wanted 100 1928 peace dollars or 221 peace dollars in almost any grade, they were available from several different sources in South Florida. This guy happened to have a showcase with as many silver dollars as you could cram in one showcase. I'm estimating he had 300, maybe 400 loose silver dollars in there, all 28s. He had a little card that said, your choice, $30. So I walked over to him and I said, how much would you sell that to a 13-year-old kid for, meaning myself? He looked at me and gave me an odd look, and he said, you don't have enough money to afford this, kid. He didn't say that, but he had that look. And he said, to you? I said, $25. I just about broke my arm reaching my wallet and gave him $25. I spent 5 full minutes going through must have been 50 pieces at least, maybe more. And I pulled out what we would now call an MS-64 1928 peace dollar for 25 bucks. Before the show was over, about an hour later, I sold it to a dealer for 32 bucks. I had made 7 bucks in a couple of hours, okay? So maybe my boss was right. Maybe I did have a future in this business. So I took that $7 profit. I went over to the dealer on the other table next to me and bought a 1879 Morgan for $1.20 that eventually ended up in a 65 dimple holder many, many years later. And I paid $1.20 for it. My boss said, "You're crazy. You can still go to the bank and get 79 dollars for $1." I said, "Not that look like this, you can't." And my mom goes to the bank once a week and brings me silver dollars home, so I know what's at the banks. So he said, "Well, maybe you're right, but it still seems like too much money." So anyway, that was my story about my first coin show. And it was something I will never forget. Some of the biggest dealers at the time were there, and I got to know them in later years. Most of you would not know their names unless you lived in South Florida, and I don't think anyone here did. But one guy by the name of Charles Shotgun Slade used to advertise in Coin World. He'd have 2 full-page ads with shotgun rolls, and his nickname was Shotgun Slade. Shotgun Slade was eventually imprisoned for writing bad checks and doing other things, and was eventually released after he served his time and got a government job detecting counterfeit checks that were written by hand, because that was what he was convicted of doing. And he helped put a lot of bad guys in jail. So that was how he turned his life around, and we actually saw him back dealing in coins again. Now, what he went to jail for had nothing to do with coins, but it was an interesting story. And I got to meet Charles Shotgun Slade. Slade is an Irish name, and he would show up at coin shows with bright Kelly green outfit, including a tie and a green hat, and it was quite a sight to see him coming through the doors. So there were some very strong and amazing personalities in the coin hobby in the early 1960s. Something else happened in 1960 that impacted my life very much, and I'd like to mention. In late 1960, both of my parents were sworn in as citizens of the United States. Back in the 50s, if you decided to immigrate to the United States, you had to spend 5 years in the U.S. and then have someone sponsor you who has observed you working, operating, going to school, observed your life, and will testify that you are a good person who works hard and deserves to be a citizen. I schooled my parents on the history of the United States because I was an A student in history. They took the citizenship test, 25 questions, they each got 24 right and became citizens. A few months later, in early '61, it was my turn to be sworn in. Because both of my parents were U.S. citizens, I didn't have to take the test. My parents were both citizens of the U.S., and they sponsored me. And I had to go and be sworn in at the age of 14 at Miami Federal Court. And I will tell you, it was the experience of a lifetime. Being sworn in as a citizen of the greatest country in the world, how great is that? So it was probably one of the greatest experiences of my life. I'll never forget it. Anyway, after that first coin show, you might say I was on my way in coins. I would continue to dabble in coins and work occasionally at local coin shows. But I was getting into those teenage years where I was interested in more things than coins. I don't think I have to spell it out to you what that was. Then I graduated from high school at Delray Beach Seacrest and went to Florida Atlantic University. I paid my own way in college. How did I do this? I borrowed $1,000 a year on the National Student Defense Loan. I won a $500 Hayden Burns scholarship that paid me $500 a year. Mr. Burns was a former governor of Florida who endowed a scholarship fund for many years to graduating seniors from Florida high schools who wanted to go to college. Now, Mr. Burns was, even by Florida standards, one of the most corrupt governors in Florida history, but that didn't bother me. His $500 worked quite well. So I used that, and I worked 30 hours a week at Publix grocery stores as a cashier, and I worked occasional Sunday coin shows, and my income from those 4 sources allowed me to pay my own way through college. And I was very proud of myself that I was able to extend my education. I started graduate school and was drafted into the U.S. Army. At this point in American history, deferments were not available if you were in grad school. Only if you're an undergrad working to your bachelor's degree would you get a deferment. I took the Army intelligence test. Now that is not an oxymoron, despite what you may have heard. And I was informed by my commanding officer that I had finished first among all the people who took the test at that facility. And he wanted to see me on the double. So I went in there, snapped off a salute. Campbell, I've got a job for you. You can be either a dental tech or an x-ray tech. We normally do not put draftees who are here only for 2 years through 6 months of training, but we've got an acute shortage of x-ray techs in particular, and injured soldiers were coming back from Vietnam every day at a frightful pace. He said, we need you to go to x-ray school, we need you now. Well, sir, that's what I'll do then. So 132 kids started off in the Army's x-ray school, which unlike the Air Force's x-ray school, the Army's was approved by the AMA. The Air Force's was not. I finished first in my class of the 30 people who graduated. The other 102 did not graduate. And I was immediately assigned to the Burn Treatment Center at Brooke Army Hospital at Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas. I worked on hundreds and hundreds of napalm and Agent Orange victims every week. I did it under extreme conditions. These guys in the Burn Treatment Center were less than 100 yards from the X-ray department, but could not be transported from point A to point B. So I was trained to take a portable X-ray machine, which weighed several hundred pounds, and go over to the Burn Treatment Center and take portable chest X-rays, portable arm, thorax, leg X-rays of guys who were disfigured beyond your wildest dreams. I did it well, and because I did it well, I got to do more of it. My commanding officer accepted my offer to work 16-hour shifts, and I was still falling behind. That's how many people were coming back from Vietnam. So my commanding officer called me to his office one day and said, Campbell, I guess you've heard you're on orders to go to Vietnam. I said, yes, sir, I've been told that. He said, well, I've got news for you. You're not going. So I just stood there, and he said, you're probably wondering why. I said, yes, sir. He said, you do the work of 2 X-ray techs by working 16 hours. And he said, if I hire 2 civilian X-ray techs to do what you do, we're not budgeted for doing that. So as long as I have any say-so, and I'm the senior colonel in this part of the United States, you will never be going to Vietnam as long as you work 2 16-hour shifts in this hospital and work at the level you're working at. He said, I can't hire anybody as good as you are. And he said, when you get out of the Army, I'll write you a letter that will get you into any school you would like to get into. And he followed through with that, I might add. So that was my military experience. After I got out of the Army, I was assigned to the active reserves and worked in an artillery base. The Army decided they didn't need to use me as an X-ray tech, so I went out and observed what happened at Camp Blanding, Florida, near Jacksonville. The commanding officer thought the men were showing up for work drunk, and considering what we were using, the power of the shells that were coming out of these tanks, we couldn't have drunks shooting them out onto I-75. In fact, that did happen while I was there. A shell landed on a car that, praise Jesus, was empty. The guy had run out of gas, went a half a mile down to the exit to the gas station, was coming back to his car just in time to see it get blown to kingdom come by a shell fired by a drunk sergeant in one of these tanks. A lot of people lost their careers over that, and I won't go into all the details, but it was not a pretty sight. Anyway, I served my country both on active duty and on active reserve. I lost most of my hearing in the reserves in serving my country, and I would gladly do it again. But it was a horrific experience, make no mistake about that. So when I got out, I took the colonel's recommendation and was admitted to an X-ray school in a civilian training center and finished my training, and I scored the highest anybody ever scored in that school on the National Registry exam for radiologic technologists. I worked as an X-ray and CAT scan tech. I was one of the first 500 CT scan techs in North America. I was trained by a guy who worked for EMI Industries. EMI was a wholly owned subsidiary owned by the Beatles. They funded a project that invented the CT scanner, and the inventor won the Nobel Prize in medicine. The kid who trained me was trained by the guy who won the Nobel Prize. So I had to undergo very intensive training, And I was able to stick it out and learn what I needed to know, working as a CT scan tech, and I did this for many years. And then all of a sudden, I'm getting back to my collecting years again. And when I was working as a CT scan tech, every doctor and every surgeon in the hospital knew I was president of the local coin club. They'd come down and ask me for advice. It was just a short period of time before I was investing large sums of money from medical professionals into DMPL Morgan dollars. I saved one doctor who had bought a bust dollar in extra fine condition that was counterfeit, and it was plugged too. This guy was really brutal. And I told him to get his money back. He did. And I invested some money for him in deep mirror proof-like dollars at $6 and $7, which they eventually liquidated for an enormous profit. And the word spread, and before I knew it, I had a big business going in coins while working full-time as a CT scan tech. In 1977, a group of guys got together in West Palm Beach to form a coin club. The old Palm Beach Coin Club had become inactive, partly because the officers of that coin club were selling counterfeit coins at club meetings, which I pointed out to them. And the club stopped meeting, and there was a period of time when there were no meetings. Then the new club was founded. It was in the back office of a coin dealer who had a coin shop, had room for about 12 or 15 chairs and one 8-foot table, how odd and similar. And the club met there 3 times. For the 4th meeting, I was on vacation with my wife down in Key Largo. And when I got back, I was informed by the secretary that the president, the coin dealer, had closed his coin shop and was moving to California to take a job as a Coke distributor. Now that's Coca-Cola, not cocaine, okay? So we have this clear. It was California. So he said, we elected you president to take his place while you were gone. There's a lesson there, folks. Think it over. There was a lesson there. So the secretary said, now before you say yes, as if I was going to, there's a couple things you need to know. We don't have a place to have meetings, and we have $12.50 in our treasury. I said, well, under those glowing conditions, I accept. I knew a friend who was a councilman at the Haverhill Town Hall. Haverhill is a suburb of West Palm Beach, and they had a nice meeting hall with room for about 60 to 80 people. They had 14 8-foot tables. They had all the chairs we could possibly use, and best of all, he owed me a favor. The coin club could rent it for free. So we had a free place to meet, and the lighting was good. So I had some ideas about what we should do at a coin club meeting. And I told the other officers and the members, I said, now that I'm president, we're going to have every meeting a U.S. coin market report. Remember, virtually no coin club members got the Gray Sheet, Coin World, Numismatic News. Every year they get a red book and that was it. So they really didn't know what was going on. And lucky for us, one of the 14 or 15 club members, well, we were now up to 20, was on the coin show circuit, went to coin shows all over the U.S., and another guy who was a foreign coin specialist also was on the circuit. So I said, every meeting we're going to have a U.S. coin market update and a world coin update for you foreign coin collectors. Every meeting we're going to have an educational program, and every meeting we're going to have a real auction of real coins. At least 20, 30, 40 coins every meeting. So those of you who actually want to buy and sell coins can do it. Those of you who want to watch can sit back and watch, whatever you want to do. Eventually, of course, things just exploded. Meanwhile, my career as an x-ray tech was taking off. As I said, doctors at the hospital heard I was president of the local coin club, and they were investing big bucks. At this time also, something else happened that was equally important. The 1977 A&A show in Atlanta. How many of you have heard of the Redfield estate? Hopefully, most of you. Okay, good. Arguably one of the 3 or 4 greatest hoards of all time of U.S. silver dollars, burst onto the scene at the A&A in 1977. Dealers had stacks of silver dollars direct from the Redfield hoard. They opened the bags and just laid them out on their table. There were 2 coin shows in Atlanta. The A&A, with President Grover Criswell of the A&A, going across the street to the smaller show, run by a man who is still running one-day shows in Atlanta to this very day. His last name is Waycaster. Paul Waycaster, W-A-C-A-S-T-E-R, was and still is running one-day shows in Atlanta. When the A&A came to town, there were hundreds of dealers who couldn't get a table. So they just talked Paul into having a competing 3-day show right across the street from the ANA. The president of the ANA accused Paul Waycaster of having a coin show full of counterfeits, called the cops, demanded that the competing coin show be shut down. When the cops showed up, Paul said, I don't know of a single counterfeit coin here, and if there is, I'm going to throw that coin dealer out. But if you go across the street to the ANA, you'll find several dealers over there selling counterfeit coins. Well, eventually this pissing contest ended, and the two agreed to disagree, and the two coin shows went out at the same time. At these two shows, I saw the most amazing display of silver dollars I have ever seen. Steve Ivey had a bag of Proof-Like and Deep Mirror Proof-Like 90 cc's out of Redfield. I bought one for the astounding price then of $600, and I sold it with ease at $850 to the first person I showed it to. There were bags of 91 cc, 1890 O. I had only seen 2 1890 O dollars in Deep Mirror Proof-Like in my life until the 77 ANA in Atlanta, where I bought 40 of them. And they all sold, and everybody who bought them from me made money, and may God strike me dead if I'm not telling the absolute truth. Other rare and scarce dates existed in Proof-Like and Deep Mirror Proof-Like in vast quantity. It was a dollar collector's dream come true. They were exciting times. At that show, 2 young kids who couldn't have been more than 24 or 25 had 2 bags of 91S dollars out of Redfield just laying on a wooden table, no cloth cover, nothing, bare bones. Had a little sign that said $65 each if you buy 2 or more. So I asked them if I could buy 10 for $600, and they thought about it, and they thought about it, and they finally, as I'm peeling off the $600, they said, yeah, we'll take the $600, pick yourself out 10. And to this day, I have yet to buy another gem 91S dollar in Proof-Like condition, but I bought 10 of them at once that would grade either 64 or 65 PL by today's standards. Again, I took them back to our club meeting, called a few doctors. They didn't last one day. If I'd have had 100 instead of 10, I could have sold 100. So I learned my lesson there. At the show and the competing coin shows, there were amazing items. The most amazing, however, and this will really set you back if you think about it, at this time the 95S Morgan was the 3rd most expensive date in the series. The Redfield estate included roughly 3 to 5 bags of 95S's, one of which was on display at the ANA. A California dealer who's still alive and still dealing, I won't mention his name because I promised him I wouldn't, had a bag of 95S dollars that were Proof-Likes. None of these have ever appeared on the population reports. None of them have ever been sent to the major grading services to the best of my knowledge. And I have contacts at all the grading services, being the senior guy at ICG. I talk to my cohorts at the other 3 services every so often. They have never appeared. He said, are you the guy that writes these articles in Coin World about Proof-Like dollars? I said, yeah, that's me. He said, well, you need to see this. So needless to say, my eyes just about dropped out of my head. I thought one would be an amazing experience. He had a bag of them. Whatever happened to that bag, I do not know, but I do know for an absolute fact it exists. I didn't have enough money to even buy 1 coin because he was only selling them by the roll, and I believe he was selling them for roughly $2,500 a coin times 20. I didn't have that kind of money to spend, so I didn't get to buy any. But I often wondered what happened to those coins. It was an amazing experience. Also, about this time in the late 70s, some really big books were coming out on silver dollars. Wayne Miller wrote his Morgan and Peace Dollar textbook, which I think a couple of you have probably at least heard of. If you look in the early pages, I am listed as a consultant to that book. I became very close friends with Wayne Miller, still talk to him occasionally. He's one of the truly great people in the history of coin dealing. He no longer does shows. He stays in Helena, Montana. He and his wife sold his, at the time, world's greatest collection of Morgan dollars to fund a home for the homeless in Helena, Montana. And that's what they spend their money on. They are somewhat subsidized by the state and federal government for providing homes for the homeless. And in Montana, in the dead of winter, you need to be inside, not outside. So the service that he and his wife provide are invaluable. They're saints. And they get paid a few $100s a month to take in all these needy people. They've even taken in several children and raised them on their own who were simply trying to get out of the cold. These people are saints. Another book, Fight Inflation with Silver Dollars by Les and Sue Fox and Fight Inflation with Silver Dollars, and Silver Dollar Fortune Telling. Both of them came out in the early 80s. I wrote complete chapters on mirror surface dollars for both books. The books have become kind of hard to find. I tried to buy one for a friend last week. There were none for sale on the internet, so I'm going to go back and try again. Anyway, by this time I was a well-known dollar nut, and I decided to run for the Board of Fun. And the reason was, when the ANA was held in Florida in the mid-1970s, Mr. Fun, the founder of Fun, Bob Hendershot, invited me to become a member of Fun. And in fact, I became a life member, number 217. And I told him I was from West Palm and that our club had paid its dues and was a dues-paid member of the Fun organization. He said, well, I hope you run for the board because you seem like you're a young man with lots of energy and that's what we need. Okay? In 1979, I ran for the board and was elected to the board of Fun. 38 years later, I am still on the board of Fun, currently serving my second term as president. 1980 comes up. I'm on the board 1 year. The Fun 1980 show was the all-time greatest show in numismatic history. And it wasn't just because of the hard workers at Fun, and believe me, we have them. At the Fun show, silver maxed out at $50 an ounce, pushed by the Hunt brothers and their Arab allies. And gold, which had been trading in the 280s and 290s, spiked up, and by January, it was at $750. In December, about a month before the coin show, Ginger and Roger Bryan, who ran the Fun show, called me and said, Randy, we've got a problem. I said, what's the problem? Well, we've completely sold out our 350 tables, and I've got, as of now, 191 checks for more tables from people, and I don't have any more tables to sell. So I concocted an idea whereby we would contact everybody at the Sheraton Twin Towers, where the coin show was to be held, who had rented a side room. A bridal party had rented a room that we could put almost 200 tables in. I said, well, Ginger, why don't we approach the father of the bride and invite him to move the wedding reception either up or back a week, and we will pay him, say, $5,000 if he will do that. Great idea, she says. So the manager of the hotel gave Ginger the phone number, and when the father of the bride first heard this, he thought this was a joke, that this was not for real. And she said, sir, I assure you, this is a genuine offer. I will drive from Gainesville, Florida to your house tonight, be at your front door tomorrow with a check for $5,000. All you have to do is say, do it. So he said yes. The check was delivered at 8 a.m. the next morning. The bridal party was put off for 1 week, and we sold 150, 180 extra tables in that room. And we took the $5,000 and divided it by 180 tables, and whatever it came out to, 30, 40 bucks a table, we added that to the bourse fee for every table that was sold in that second smaller room. Not one dealer said no, and we sold those 180 tables in 2 days. Everybody wanted to have a table at the January 1980 Fun show. I sincerely believe we could have sold 2,000 tables of that show if we'd have had room, but we didn't. Okay, let's move ahead. I had started off with a bang my time on the Board of Fun. One thing I did want to mention, and I completely neglected, when I got elected to Fun, my promise was to create and support and promote a series of educational seminars at the Winter Fun Show. It had never been done before in Fun history. When I got elected to the Fun board, there had never been an educational presentation of any kind in the first 20 or so Fun conventions. My goal was to change that. I went to several leading numismatists who were friends of mine. First was Bill Fiva. I think most of you here know about Bill Fiva, the Mr. Numismatic Education. He, of course, said yes. I've known Bill for 50 years. Wayne Miller said yes. Les Fox said yes. Anthony Swiatek said yes. And before I know it, I had 7 or 8 educational programs, and that's what we went with in '79 and in 1980. And ever since then, the programs have continued to get better. We've maxed out at 15 educational programs for the Winter Fun and 5 for the upcoming Summer Fun show, which I've also been running those since day one. Of all the things that I have done in numismatics, I would say the Fun educational program is my #1 achievement and the thing I'm most proud of. I always believed that if you educated your collectors, whether it was at the local coin club level, giving programs on the state of the U.S. and world coin markets, or at the major convention level, having seminars from some of the world's leading experts, I felt that this was the best way to garner respect and interest from knowledgeable people, helping to make them even more knowledgeable and more involved in coins. If you could go and hear a silver dollar seminar from Wayne Miller for free, would you go? Hell yes, you'd go in a heartbeat. And I have that attitude about Bill Fiva, about Anthony Swiatek, and about everybody who has spoken and continues to speak at the Fund Educational Series. I think it's something that every big show should do, and in fact, just about every big show now does it. And I think it's a great thing for coins, and I think it's one reason why we continue to grow and we continue to expand. I'm very proud of the Fund Educational Program. Let's go back in time to 1983. I made the huge decision that I was enjoying CT scan and working in the medical field, but I also felt that I was born to be in the coin business full time. And sure enough, I became vice president of Palm Beach Rare Coins in 1983. I was given the job of auction director as well, and during my tenure at Palm Beach Rare Coins, we had several auctions that exceeded $1 million. At one time, Palm Beach Rare Coins was a real force in the coin market. Eventually, the four owners split up and they shut down the coin shop, but this was long after I had left. About this time, a little before '83, the ANA sent a representative to West Palm Beach, and his purpose was to hire me to be a full-time grader for Annex. Apparently, my reputation with the major dollar dealers had influenced the leaders of the ANA to try to hire me as a grader. At that point in time, they were grading by what's known as technical grading standards. I told them that system had not worked and will not be accepted by the collectors and the dealers, no matter what I think of it or whatever the board of the ANA thinks of it, doesn't matter, it will not be accepted, and in fact it wasn't. I told them there was a move afoot right now, and this is again in the early 80s, by coin dealers to establish their own grading service, and if the ANA did not alter the way they graded coins to conform to market standards, they would be put out of business. He said I was crazy. I said, well, if you change your mind and you decide to go to market grading standards, come back and I'll accept. You can tell that to the board. In 1989, at this point, the ANA had lost most of its business in grading to PCGS and NGC. They finally realized that indeed they did need to change and grade according to market standards, and they hired me to help with their situation. They came calling in late September of 1989, and I signed a contract to become a full-time coin grader at Annex. I did this while I was serving as president of Fund. Also during that time, I taught the summer seminar. I gave a seminar on how to grade silver dollars, strangely enough, and we had a full class for that, I'm proud to say. I'm going to take a step back a little bit further now to 1982. I don't know why I'm going forward and backward, but when you get old, these things happen, you'll see. In 1982, a group of silver dollar specialists were formed, and they called themselves the National Silver Dollar Roundtable. Their purpose, their objective, was to champion the inclusion of intermediate grades in the overall grading scheme. At that point, on the gray sheet and in the ANA grading guide, there were only 3 grades, MS 60, 65, and 70. Now, we all know that virtually no coins grade 60, 65, or 70, or at least it's a slim minority. The vast majority of coins have another grade. And we wanted the grades, the intermediate grades between 60 and 65, and the intermediate grades between 65 and 70 included in the grading scheme because coins were priced according to that scheme. And the ANA Board of Directors at first was opposed to change, but when they saw their empire of coin grading at Annex had declined to over 90%, they knew it was time to make a change, and they agreed, after meeting with the NSDR for several times, to accept intermediate grades in the overall grading scheme. Another thing we wanted to do at the NSDR was to get proof-like, deep mirror proof-like included in grading. At that time, it was not included by any of the major services and not by ANAX either. That changed when I became a grader. We also asked that major VAM varieties, such as hot lips dollars, the O over CC, the O over S dollars, the major varieties be included in all the pricing guides and that they be attributed by the major grading services. David Hall once made a statement to a group of PCGS dealers. I know because Palm Beach Rare Coins was one of the original members of PCGS, and I saw him say it, that hell will freeze over before I do VAMs or varieties. Well, hell must have frozen stiff because PCGS has been doing both for over a decade. So when I hired on at ANAX, it was with a feeling of satisfaction that the NSDR had accomplished what we set out to do. I was requested to be on the original board of directors of the NSDR in 1982. I didn't look for this job, but Wayne Miller said I was the man for the job. So Wayne, myself, Dean Tavener, Al John Breyer, and a few others formed the original board of the NSDR in 1982. By 1997, I was president of the NSDR. I have since served the NSDR as Master of Ceremonies at their annual banquets, awards banquet in Florida, and I've done this for 24 straight years. Speaking of MC, I was MC of the 1997 ANA in Portland, Oregon. I did this the day after my first grandson was born, and I got to hold him. I have to give high praise to my daughter for arranging to have the birth just the day after the pre-ANA show during the one day in between, and then I had to start the ANA. What a great job she did. The boy was born just on the right day. I got to hold him a half hour after he was born. Those of you who are grandparents know exactly what I'm talking about. My wife and I are now blessed with 6 great-grandkids. It's a sobering experience, but I have found that the young kids today laugh at the same jokes their mothers and their grandmothers laughed at 30 or 40 years ago. I just recycle all my old jokes, bounce the kids on my knee, and they still laugh like crazy. And they never get tired of yanking on my gray hair to see if it's really or whatever it is. Well, we achieved what we wanted to with dimples, PLs, varieties, grading changes. All of this I found to be extremely rewarding. And as I look back on it, I'm glad I did all those things I did, even though it certainly was a lot of work. One thing I will tell you in my 56 years, 57 years in this business, whether you like it or believe it or not, the silver dollar has been and always will be one of the main components of the U.S. coin market. And I believe those of you looking to invest or just collect an interesting series, that the silver dollar series offers as many opportunities as just about any other series in the U.S. coin series. Not to say you shouldn't collect the other series too, you should. I happen to believe right now, and I don't give a lot of financial advice, but my 2 favorite series in the silver dollar market right now are the trade dollars and the seeded dollars. They are both grotesquely undervalued. You cannot buy certain dates in the trade dollar series for anywhere near bid unless the seller is a stupid guy and doesn't know much about coins. The early P-Mint trade dollars from 73, 4, 5, and 6 are all grotesquely undervalued and sell among knowledgeable dealers for double gray sheet or more prices if they can find them. I think everybody in this room will be shocked to learn that the 73 Philadelphia trade dollar is rarer than the 73 CC. There are less than 100 slabbed examples of XF and AU 73 Philadelphia trade dollars. So I don't care if Dave Bowers or anybody else thinks there's 10,000 of them out there floating around. They must be floating around because they haven't showed up in any of the grading services. I can tell you that for an absolute fact. Well, moving right along here, let's move forward to 1985. Again, I was working at Palm Beach Rare Coins, and it was time for me, I realized, to start looking for that special lady. I had been married once, and after 12 years, we went our separate ways. That was in early 1980, a very tumultuous year in coins. And by 1985, I thought it was time to start looking again. And this was before there were computers. People got to meet each other either at bars or through dating services. Not being a smoker, I was opposed to the bar scene, so we decided to do that. I signed up with a dating service, and the lady at the dating service said, "You should call this girl. We had a conversation. She saw a photograph of you and your background and what you do, and she wants you to call her." I said, "Okay." So I did what I was suggested to do, and she arranged to meet me at work at Palm Beach Rare Coins. I said, "I'll just be getting off work at 6. Meet me here. I'll take you to a nice place for dinner." So about 5 minutes before 6, my wife shows up, my future wife, in a bright red outfit, red shoes. She was tall, 5'9", dark hair. when I talked to her on the phone, she had this very pleasant speaking voice. And I was just, when she walked into that coin shop, my coworker said, "Randy, your jaw dropped a foot." He said, "I knew right then you were a goner." And it was true. It was love at first sight. And 30 years later, my wonderful Penny is still my wonderful wife. And all my friends who are silver dollar guys like me still kid me about marrying a penny. I said, "Go ahead and criticize. Eat your heart out." Anyway, when we were dating, how many of you are from the Chicago area? Any of you guys here? Okay. When we were dating, I said, "You got to go with me to a Dolphins game," because I've been going to Dolphin games since year one. And except for one of the years I was in Dick Nixon's Army, I've been to Dolphin games every year since 1966. I said, "We got a game against the Bears coming up next week, and they're undefeated, and I think you'd like to see this game." So I took her and our oldest daughter to that game, and we screamed our lungs out. And for the one and only time that year, the Bears went down to defeat. And I still have fond memories of that game, not just because the Dolphins won, but I convinced my wife that it was time for her to get serious with me, and in fact she did. So it was a turning point in my life for many reasons. Now back to my career in coins. In 1988, I decided to run for president of FUN. I'd already been on the board for 10 years. I was elected by a very wide margin. About a year later, I signed a contract to become a full-time grader at Annax in Colorado Springs, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation. Me and my lovely wife left our beloved Florida, and we headed to Colorado. A year later, Annax was sold, and so we moved again to suburban Columbus, Ohio, where I started writing a grading column for Coin World. This continued for several years. Now, previously, I had been elected president of not only the West Palm Coin Club, which I had to give up when I moved to Colorado, but I was president of the West Palm Club for 14 years. I get to Colorado, within a few weeks they elect me president of their coin club. What an honor. But now we're moving to Ohio, and I joined the local coin club in Central Ohio, and they asked me to become president of that coin club. I politely declined, and I told them, "What you really need is a secretary," which is all you guys should know is the toughest job at a coin club. Not being president, any dummy can do that, I proved it. But being a good secretary, that's an important role for any coin club. I told them I would perform that job for 2 years, and they had to come up with a new young whippersnapper to take my place, but I'd do it for 2 years. Well, I performed that job while I was serving on the board of the NSDR, and while I was serving as a board member and upcoming president of FUN. I was a busy boy. Let's fast forward to 2007. By now, Annex has been bought and sold 2 more times and was relocated, this time to Austin, Texas. Late in 2007, I was offered the job of senior grader at ICG Grading Service, then located in Denver. Part of my job was to help supervise the move of ICG from Colorado back to my beloved Florida. Remember now, I had spent 1 year in Colorado Springs and 16 very forgettable winters in Columbus, Ohio. So I was ready to return to Florida. It was totally unexpected, though. Excuse me, I missed a page. Boy, I hate getting old. Anyway, I was as happy as I could be to know that I was returning to the state of low taxes and high temperatures. Now, my father had schooled me, "Randy, you want to live in a state with low taxes and high temperatures." And when we moved to Buffalo, we had high taxes and low temperatures, and my dad says, "That's why we're moving to Florida." Okay, Dad. So I had returned at last after almost a 20-year absence to the state of low taxes and high temperatures. You may not all know this, but Florida has no state income taxes. Florida has no local income taxes. Their property taxes are about average. Texas is somewhat similar, but they have very high property taxes. Florida does not. Anyway, this December, I'll celebrate my 9th year as a senior grader at ICG. And at age 69, I can't wait to get back to work. Now, in 2014, a group of FUN board members approached me at a coin show about running again for president of FUN. Now, remember, I hadn't been president since 1990, and we're here at 2014. It was totally unexpected. I was elected president without opposition, and I plan to run again this fall for a second consecutive term as president and my third term overall as president of Fun. My main goal was to maintain Fun status as America's largest coin convention. This past January, Fun had its first 1,000 table coin show in Tampa. Actually, it was 1,010 tables. The way we count tables in Florida, a single table counts as one, an L shape with two 8-foot tables counts as two, and if you're Heritage and you use 28 tables, we just count that as two. So all the national coin dealerships, the large ones that take multiple tables, we count them as 2 tables sold. So although we are listing the table, the show is selling 1,010 tables, we probably set up over 1,100 at the Tampa Fun Show. This coming January, it is my hope that the Fun Show, which moves to Fort Lauderdale for this year, will be even larger than the Tampa Show. As you may know, for over 30 years, the Fun Show and the New York International Show in New York have competed against each other, scheduled on the same weekend. This coming January, that changes. The New York International will be a week later, and all the major international foreign coin dealers who've wanted to do Fun will now get to do both shows, which they've always wanted to do both shows. So I'm anticipating Fun will pick up at least 50 to 100 more table sales simply because we're no longer in competition with the New York International group. And you know what? I love it. Who wouldn't want to come to sunny Florida for the world's largest coin show in early January? When I first got on the Fun board in 1979, Fun was not one of the 10 largest coin shows in America, maybe not one of the top 20. But the mind-boggling 1980 Fun show changed all that forever. By 1989, my first year as Fun president, we were selling over 500 tables at our show. Now we are over 1,000 tables. But don't think for one second that I did this on my own. I had help at all the coin clubs I served with. I had help from some of the greatest dealers on the planet when I was with the National Silver Dollar Roundtable, and I still am. I want to save my highest praise for those serving currently and in the past on the Fun board, because without them, we couldn't have had the successes we have. A couple more stories you people need to hear before we shut this down. I'm going back to 1979 again, my first year on the Fun board. We were scheduled to have the Fun show at the Diplomat Hotel in Hallandale. Hallandale is between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, very exclusive area. Gulfstream Park is there, the home of the Florida Derby. We were all set to have the show. It was October, and the show was going to be in early January. We get a call from the general manager of the Diplomat saying our show had been canceled. And we said, well, you can't cancel our show. And he told the president of Fun at that time, I was not the president, I was just on the board, that the National Football League needed a hotel for the 1980 Super Bowl to be played in the Orange Bowl in January, and they decided they wanted the Diplomat, so that all of our room reservations had been canceled. So the president of Fun called me, and I said, well, that's illegal. We got to get a lawyer and sue these assholes. And he said, we can do that, but you're going to need at least $250,000 up front to hire a group of attorneys to sue the National Football League. We didn't have $250,000 in our treasury. We didn't have close to that. So we went to option B. Option B being find another hotel. So we decided to move the show to the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. Some of you may remember the James Bond super movie Goldfinger. About a quarter of that movie was filmed at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. It is an internationally known and respected hotel, and quite frankly, I was stunned when we were able, at this relatively late date, to secure the Fontainebleau as the host for the Fun show in '79. We show up at the coin show a week ahead of time. There's no signs there at all saying it's what the name of the hotel is or where you are. We found out that the day before the hotel had been sold to the Hilton interests, and the first thing they did was tear down the Fontainebleau signs. Bob Hendershot, the founder of Fun, who even then was an elderly man, took me in to have a meeting with the owner of the Fontainebleau, a man by the name of Steve Muss. That's not important. But Steve was the front man for the new organization. Steve, we've got to have the name up there so our conventioneers, most of whom have never been to the Fontainebleau, can find the coin show. Well, we're not paying for it. So Bob Hendershot came up with a brilliant idea, as he frequently did. Steve, as a goodwill gesture, now you know you're wrong in this, as a goodwill gesture, Fun will split the cost of a big 50-foot by 75-foot sign that says, "Welcome to the Fontainebleau Hilton, home of the 1980 Fun Show. We'll pay half if you'll pay half." When the show is over, you can just save the part that says, "Welcome to the Fontainebleau Hilton," and chop off the rest of it at Fun's expense. You can go ahead and do that. So he hemmed and hawed, and I think the price for this huge, massive sign back in the 70s was $1,000. I'd hate to think of what it would be today. And in fact, the Fontainebleau Hilton went for it. The sign was put up in 2 days' time. And when our conventioneers came to the show, they had a huge sign welcoming them to one of the most famous hotels ever designed by man or beast. And the show was an outrageous success. Little did we know that the '79 Fun Show would pale in comparison to the one at the Sheraton Twin Towers in January of 1980. But the January '79 show at the Fontainebleau was a big success, despite what the NFL did to us. Also during the late 80s, Fun secured a contract, a long-term deal with Heritage Rare Coin Galleries, and 2 of their biggest auctions ever have been held at the Fun Show. The second biggest in history of Heritage was held at the 2005 50th Anniversary Fun Convention held in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. There's a lot of money in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, and I'm confident that the upcoming Fun Convention in January will be a huge hit also. We came up with some ideas. One of the ideas was to pay the Fun member coin clubs up to a fee of $1,000 if they would rent a bus and let their club members come to the Fun Show. Rent a Greyhound bus. It usually costs around $1,200 to $1,500. Fun pays the first $1,000. The club usually collects about $5 a head to get on the bus and come to the Fun Show. And frankly, a lot of our members in Florida are older folks, and we shouldn't be driving at night maybe, and we don't really like driving in Orlando or Tampa or Fort Lauderdale. So leave the driving to us. Fun transports these coin club members to the Fun Show. It's something we've been doing for over 25 years. It's a big success. I wish other state and national organizations did this for their coin shows. So there have been a lot of things that we've done, a lot of innovating that we've done. Another thing that I have done in my career that I'm extraordinarily proud of, both my 18 years at ANAX and my 9 years, or almost 9 years at ICG, our organization has provided free verbal opinions of grade and authenticity at every show we attend from a professional grader. I believe consumers have a right to know the approximate grade of any coin they submit to a professional grading service. I believe consumers have a right to know if the coin is genuine before they submit it to a grading service. The other grading services don't agree with me. Well, guys like me served our country so they can disagree with me. That's fine. But I have my opinion, and that is my strongly held opinion. We will give you at ICG, if you come up to our table at any show that we have a table, a free verbal opinion, and we'll give it to you for free. If you decide to submit your coin to us, we say thank you. If you decide to submit it to another grading service, we would prefer not, but you're free to do that. But I think every major grading service should give back to the hobby, and one way they can do it is to give free verbal opinions at coin shows. You won't be surprised when I tell you that a majority of my opinions are given to dealers and not to collectors, because dealers, unfortunately today, are relying too much on the opinion of the grading services. They're not learning how to authenticate and grade on their own, which they should be doing. But still, it is what it is, and we're there to take care of you. My goal when I first entered the coin hobby 56, 57 years ago was to be someone who made a difference. Someone who left the hobby in better shape when he left it. Someone who cared. Someone who grew the hobby. Well, it's taken a lot of time, but I think I have helped in a very small way to grow the hobby, and I've done so with the help of untold dozens and hundreds of people. It's been a great 57 years. I thank you for your attendance.